and welcome to my Anagrams Art YouTube channel. This week I am doing another cityscape. So if you hadn't noticed, I'm alternating between seascapes and cityscapes to mix it up a little bit and so you guys don't get too bored. I'm using a slightly different palette this time as well. It's quite purpley, which I don't think I've used before that much, but quite deep purple as well, and bright purples, which hopefully will be interesting. Also, there's a lot of zoomed in parts too, so you can really see exactly what I'm doing. As per usual, please like and subscribe, tell your friends about it, give it a thumbs up, and most importantly, please enjoy the video.
So I've started out by marking out the subject matter, which is the embankment and the bridge, and just to generally get a sense of the composition, I've marked it all out just really loosely with a paintbrush, just so I can start to fit things together in my head and work out what it's going to look like overall. But it's really important to get a rough idea of what that looks like before I start to actually put paint on the canvas, just because it could go very wrong if the perspective's not quite right. And obviously you can tell here that perspective is really important. So as I say, I've marked out the bridge, the two bridges, and I've marked out the sides of the embankment, and I've just done the sky in the same way that I've done with previous paintings, in that I have progressed the colours from a very bright white and yellow to a pinky colour, and then that in turn fades to purple. And the reason these colours work really well together is because I'm using the same pinks in the orange and the same yellows in the orange, and then the pink is the magenta, which again I've used in the purple. So it's just a case of using the same colours so that it is tonally harmonious. You can see also, and I do this mainly with my cityscapes, is I patch in the colours. So the big block of colours of the purples and the pinks and the yellows and things is just as a marker so I can get the tones right. So what I mean by that is that if I block in the colour, the background colour of things, so for example either side of the bridges I get a really deep purple that is the same as in the sky, I'm just working out what those colours are going to look like together, compositionally how it's going to work. And it's better to have a background colour so then you can paint on top of it rather than just layering thick paint on without much direction. So a lot of it is to do with layering, by which you layer the background colour on first, and then you layer the paint on top of that and the design on top of that, and then even after that, once you've done that, and you'll see me do it later, then you can start to really add a texture to it. So there's kind of 4 or more layers going on really, including the very background colour I've used, which is obviously a light turquoise colour. So it goes from turquoise, then it's layered up once more to the sort of more block colours so I can get a sense of the composition and the background. Then I paint on top of that, and then I add some texture on top of that. So there's this process that I'm working with that is proved to be very effective, but it is quite a long process. The side of the canvas that I'm working on now is really important because this is the abstract that is really going to complement the more detailed areas of the bridge and the embankment and the backdrop and the London Eye, which you'll see me put in later as well, and Big Ben and Parliament. So those bits are quite detailed, they're quite small in comparison to this really abstract area, but it seems to work really well by sort of complementing each other. And what I'm doing is just building up a plethora of colours that is going to highlight different colour areas in the rest of the painting. So all these colours you've seen me use, the oranges and the smoky colours and the blues and the reds, are all going to feature elsewhere in the painting, but they're going to really come together here to create a kind of abstract design. And that abstract design has proved really fundamental to the look of the entire painting, and it's just a really fun bit to do as well. So I'm adding up a lot of colours again, I'm layering lots, and then I'm dripping over the top. So you can see there's a lot of drips that I've added in, and that's going to add contours to what can be seen as a very simplistic area, the abstract area I mean. And I've kind of just added drips, I've added contours, I've added interest, and I've added a lot of texture as well there. You can see now that I'm building up the foreground area, and as per usual with my pieces, the closer you get to the outskirts of the canvas, the darker it's going to be because it looks like it's almost pooled in shadow. And the closer you get to the centre in the sunset, the brighter those colours are going to be. So what you will see is that peachy colour, which is the direct reflection in the water up top, which I'm now working on more here, is going to merge and fade into that purple colour exactly the same way that the sky does. So it's a mirror image. What you will notice is in the bottom half of the painting, it's going to be a lot more drawn out. So the transition from the peachy colour to the purple colour is going to be a lot more drawn out than it is in the sky, which is a lot more concentrated of those colours. And that's just because the reflection is the main part of the painting, and it doesn't need to be intense. That you've seen before when the sunset happens and the light is really dragged a lot longer than the actual subject matter, a lot longer than the sun, but it's dragged down because the light just continues. And that is where I'm doing the same thing here, because the reflection is going to continue downwards to the edge of the painting and take up a lot more room than it does in the sky. So what I'm doing now is just merging those reflections and the colours that they are producing. And that basically means smudging in the orange and the pinks with the purples and every kind of mixture of colour that creates in between. So I'm using a little bit of turquoise here as well, and that is just because it's a really nice complement to the purple tones of the rest of the picture, and also it ties in the green on the left hand side in the abstract bit I was talking about. It ties that green in with the purples and the blues just to add that sort of in between colour, that balancing colour. So I'm now working on the light source coming down and that reflection of the sunset itself, and I'm adding white to the yellow and just dragging it right down. And as I always say, the vertical here of the reflection of that light creates a really nice conversation between the vertical and the horizontal accents, and just sort of balances it out, because it is a very horizontal piece with the bridges that are going across, and those verticals of the bottom of the painting where the darkness meets the light, and also from the very top of the sunset downwards, that vertical is really important. And also the drips I'm doing right now as well. So I always say that I use those drips as almost shading, and they also just really help to give the painting a sense of the 3D as well, because it looks like there's also reflections going on in the water, as well as the fact that it's dark shading and texture as well from the drips themselves. And also I think the fact that they're drips and they're kind of naturally occurring as well almost just adds a sense of authenticity to the work and stops the painting looking too mechanical or formulaic. Also, they're just really fun and they add a sort of vibrancy as well to the piece, which I think is important because it's a very vibrant cityscape, and that sort of animation really adds to the work too. So it's a win-win all round really, and I enjoy doing it as well. So I'm using the same blue that's in the sky that I've used to make the purple, and that is ultramarine, and also a little bit of Prussian blue as well, just quite a limited amount on the brush to add some more shadows and add some kind of shading and make sure compositionally that everything is working. And what I'm doing right now, which is the shadows and the reflections of the bridge area, is really important, because again that's adding a vertical directly in the middle of the painting, which is contrasting to the horizontal of the base line of the bridge, and that is such a strong accent across the painting, across almost the centre of the picture, that it's really important to balance those out. So I'm just sort of balancing things out, putting in the forms, shading as well, just to get a rough idea of what it's going to look like before I put in any real detail and any real texture, because as I said before, it's really hard to play around with a piece once you've got too much texture and too much paint involved, because you end up sort of just making a sludgy mess. So it's really important to plan out what things are going to look like first. So once you've seen that I've created those forms and laid out the composition, I'm just going to start to highlight and low light areas just to make them stand out, and also just to give them a sense of the 3D as well. That rendering is really important, and it's going to lay the foundation for the contours of the image itself of the painting. So that's really important to get those areas right before I start to add more paint onto the picture. So I've sped this up quite significantly because this bit takes ages, but basically what I'm doing is I'm using the same colours that I've used throughout the rest of the piece, so those sort of cooler colours, the turquoises and the purples and the blues, and I'm doing very flat buildings first of all, which I'm then going to build up with texture, but I'm just sort of making sure that the composition looks good and the buildings work well and they don't look too cluttered, and the shapes of them are really important for that. So I'm just making sure that they kind of tessellate together, they look like the city that I'm painting, and in this case it's London, and I'm just making sure that those areas really mirror the vibrancy of London and the buzz of London, and also just the shape and the contours of what that scene actually looks like, because the important thing is it is based in reality. Like, this is a real scene, this is a setting that exists, so it is important to combine the abstract and my impression of somewhere and a place with what is actually going on. So it's just really important that that looks more accurate, and that's why I do it with very, very thin paint, because there are times where I will have to go over certain bits and get rid of other bits and rework things, and it's just really a lot easier with thinner paint. Although this bit looks almost incidental to the painting, it's actually really, really important. You can see a close-up there of what is going to form the basis of Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. And just even though it's in the distance and really, really small, that is going to give context to the entire painting, because it's going to locate it in London, and people will look out for those icons and those things that are going to tell them where the painting is. And as I said, it gives the whole piece context, even though it's very, very small and almost insignificant. So it's really important to get those small, tiny details right and correct and in a perfect place, really. So once I mapped out the buildings and the shapes of the painting, this is the fun bit where I start to go over everything using my palette knife, and also using a mini squeezy bottle that I put paint into, and that is to really get a strong line of colour and to be more accurate. So I use the side of the palette knife and just build up that texture, just because I've got the general shape, I know what it's going to look like, and now I'm just building up the texture. And it's fine to do that once I'm confident in where everything's going, because as I said, you don't want to do that when you've got thick paint everywhere. So this is the really, really fun bit where I'm just detailing and filling in the gaps and building up the painting, adding that extra layer that I talked about from the beginning. With the 4-layer piece, I'm adding that last and final layer, which is texture, and that is going to add detail to the entire painting and also just add interest, and it's really, really fun to do. It's probably my favourite part because I'm almost finished. Exciting to see what it's going to look like when it's done. So although I've concentrated on the texture being in the background and the buildings and the bridge, it's also really important to add texture to the reflections. And what I'm doing here is using the colour of the water, so that colour that's been reflected from the sky, which is the peachy colour, and I'm just getting a thin amount on a palette knife and scraping it around the base of the bridge and where it's being held up. And that is to just create the impression that water is almost lapping up against it, that it's reflections, that there is a distinct line between the bridge and the reflections, because it is directly next to the reflection of itself, so that is going to separate it. Also, what's interesting is that I've added an extra horizontal line in by doing those reflections and using the palette knife and the paint there, but added another layer to it because I'm adding more lines that are going to break up the piece. So it is quite geometric here. I've got the reflections which are vertical, and I've then got the other reflections which are horizontal, and that's just going to create a really nice conversation between those elements and just add interest to the piece again. I'm doing a similar thing as well at the side. I'm using my palette knife in my hand to create those reflections of the water and of the lights streaming down and reflecting on the Thames from the embankment, and also here the main light from the sunset. I'm using the similar technique where I'm using my palette knife and I'm getting a little bit of paint and just brushing over the top so it's not too thick, so the paint shows through from the inside and then the background, and it's just going to create a sense of movement, a sense that something's going on. It makes it a bit more dynamic, and you can just see I'm going over certain areas. That's the really important sunset bit and the bridge area too. I'm just going over those bits, adding in the final details that are going to be really, really important to make this piece look full of life. And the next bit you'll probably recognise, that is the London Eye, but it's really, really rough drawing and outline at this point, which I'm then going to go over and fill in. Just carrying on with those details, and there you go, that is the finished painting.
So there you go. I really hope you enjoy watching me paint my cityscape. Please don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out, and see you next week.